Being a professional isn't about the money you make, the position you hold, your level of expertise, or fame. It's the motivation and the attitude you bring to your work. A desire for always learning and improving, and balancing your creative output with getting the business done. Welcome and join the Creating Pros. Hi, and welcome back to Creating Pros. I'm Jim Nettles. This week, I kind of want to focus on a couple of things that just sort of by synchronicity have been coming up a lot lately. I had the opportunity a couple of weeks ago to be on John Register's podcast. It hasn't dropped yet, and I'll let everybody know when it does. But got to be on his Amputate to Amplify podcast, and John is a silver medalist Paralympian. We got a chance to talk through a lot of things on the show that I did with him. Last week, I actually got to go meet with him in person and listen to a bit of more of his story, and as well as getting to listen to a couple of the other speakers that were there. I managed to go to a couple of meetings, met with some folks, met with a couple of clients. It's just been a busy couple of weeks. And there's sort of one of these things going on right now, and I thought it would be a good time to talk about how we manage challenges. How do we manage adversity when it's going to come up? Because it will. And how do we face personal challenges, business challenges, creative challenges? What do we do when things just aren't flowing? What do we do when something comes up? Sometimes it's just a matter of life happens, right? Sometimes there are the things that we have control over, we can manage. There are the times where we can't. Things just are going to happen. So how do we deal with adversity? How do we face it? How do we manage our way through it? Because we are all going to face adversity many times in our lives. We're going to face those personal challenges. And it was interesting talking to John because when we started the show, the first thing was his question he likes to ask of everybody was, what do you have to amputate to amplify your message? That's really kind of the premise of the show. And that led me to kind of going through, and I wasn't really fully ready for that question. And to find out my answer, you'll have to take a listen. But more so what that led me to thinking about was really what are the kinds of challenges that we face? What are the things that we have to do and we have to deal with? What do we have to do to manage it when things go awry? Listening to John's story this week, he was talking about the fact that when he was set to be an Olympian, racing for the Army, and the incident that came down that ultimately led to him losing his leg. And the physical injuries and everything that he went through and the decisions he had to make. And the notion of what changed his path in life. And listening to his story was really interesting to hear about the fact he was sitting in an airport, he was traveling, still doing things for the Army. And some kids became fascinated by his prosthetic leg. And ultimately what led to this was the mother and the couple of kids in the airport came over, and the mother, instead of walking by and ignoring him, was like, hey, my kids are really fascinated by your prosthetic leg. How many things you've had to overcome in your life to still be doing this? And John went and led to this idea in his own head of, well, if I'd overcome the adversity, I'd have my leg back. I'd still have my leg, or I'd have recovered it in some way. So I haven't overcome the problem. I'm just learning to deal with it. And there are many times in life when we're fed with a challenge or just the things that happen in life for which we cannot undo, we can't change, we cannot manage to make them not have happen. However, at the same time, there are the lessons we take away from those times. There are sometimes the matter of when these incidents occur, when things may happen to us, that we also have to look at them and say, okay, what do I learn from this? What do I take from this? And how do I move forward from here? Because again, it's not a matter of what happens to us, whether it's in our control or not. What's important is, again, how we react to things. There are definitely the things that we can plan for. We understand these things are likely to happen. Sometimes that is just as simple as we lose a creative streak. It could be a notion of deal falls through. All sorts of things like this happen. Other times it can be life happens. We go through challenges with family. We go through with challenges, in our personal lives. We lose friends. We lose family. There number of friends of mine have gone through some pretty significant losses as of recently, and how we then take from that the fact of that life does go on. How do we take these challenges that life presents us and then turn that into a position of growth, a position of learning? And hearing John talk about it from his experience of, yes, I lost a leg, and then being given a different challenge and ultimately going on to not race as an Olympian, but a Paralympian, to go on and win a silver medal, to go on and face world champions. How he's gone on from there to build an entirely different life and an entirely different career from what he had expected to do when he was younger. To look and see how his family handled these particular challenges, to see how they've grown together and everything that's come since. When we look at and face adversity, when we look at and face the problems and challenges that come up, it really is a matter of not trying to undo them. It really is a matter of we do the things that we have to do, and then we learn, we grow, we adapt, we change, and ultimately we have to integrate those challenges, those things that fundamentally change us. Sometimes it's very small, sometimes it is huge and truly life-changing. But it's when we decide we take and integrate those challenges in our lives that allows us to grow, that allows us to learn, and allows us to come forward and adapt. Because it's not those challenges, it's not the hardships, it's not those things that really define us. What defines us is the way that we look at those events and then decide to move forward. Do we allow them to leave us sitting in the bed? Do we just sit there and curl up in the corner? Or do we learn to take from that and maybe find how those challenges make us a different person, make us, if we allow them to, a better person? Or even if not necessarily a better person, but it shows us a new and different path, a new and different way of approaching everything we have in the world. So the couple of things that I would suggest that we look at when we face challenges and adversity, first of all, is often these are the moments of the strongest self-reflection. If it is a moment when you have lost someone or you found out someone is critically ill, plans that you may have had for long periods of time change in an instant. Things pivot, and then you have to adapt and look and say, okay, what's the new reality of the situation? Other times it's just a matter of maybe something doesn't go like we thought it should or we thought it would. Those kinds of challenges and those kinds of things that happen are moments where we get to look at and grow. But all of them give us an opportunity for appreciation. All of them give us an opportunity to look and say, okay, I cannot do anything about the time that's spent, but I can learn from it. So if we learn and take on that moment of self-reflection, and that moment could be moments, hours, days, years, but learning how we integrate both our good and our bad experiences, how we learn to face these challenges and adversities. First of all, we have to learn how to integrate those moments into who we are and decide how we're going to react to those situations. The second thing about dealing with and facing adversity and challenges is looking at the truth of the challenge itself. So first of all, while we look at things internally and look at how do we manage and bring this into ourselves or decide not to, because there are aspects of memory and experience that we go and say, I'm not going to allow this to change who I am. I'm not going to allow the fact that something may have happened to change me. I will just learn from the experience. Well, the second part of that becomes really understanding what has led up to a particular outcome. Again, frequently it's something that we could not have expected, perceived, or planned for. For example, a wreck, right? We don't plan for it, but if we've been through that experience, we can kind of know what to expect. Or if you've got somebody who is ill, somebody who is, aging, whatever the case may be, there are just aspects there that we have to go through, plan for, and how we're going to participate in the experience. So again, the second part of it, like reflection, is that time of contemplating, what does this really mean to me? What does this mean to my life, to the people I care about? What does this mean to my work? Because in creative life and our work are intrinsically linked. The two of them cannot be disconnected, because creative work is most often, at least in some way, a reflection of who we are and the experiences we're going through at any given time. Did a show on Sunday where we were talking about when life becomes, or when work becomes personal, right? When our personal lives start to make their way into our work. And a couple of the people that were on there, it was much more about memoirs. It was about their life experience. And in one case, it was about personal tragedy. And when you have that, when you are in and telling your story, when you're coming through and trying to figure out what's the best way to do this and to tell your story, often the creative outlet and the output is what allows us to process and integrate the experience, because it allows us to experience what has happened to us in a very different way. Or in fiction, right? If I'm writing something, if I'm doing something, there's at least components of that that are based in my personal knowledge, personal experience, or at least things that have understood and perceived in a way, because that's how they make it into the work, right? Sometimes it's just a matter of doing the research, exploring an idea, exploring the story. But quite often, the reason things make it into our work is because there's an aspect there of experience, either that we are processing. There's an aspect to the experience that we would look to have that experience. But regardless, the second major thing we've got to do is to figure out how we're going to determine, do we integrate this into ourselves, and how do we allow these experiences to shape us, to inform our decisions going forward. And then third, really the third biggest challenge around adversity is determining how we're going to allow it on how we interface with everyone else. Because there are many times, most challenges are personal, or they only affect a small number of people. And if you're in that situation where it is something that affects the family or, close friends, things like this, how we face that and the part of ourselves we expose to those people is going to be different from necessarily what the rest of the outside world would see. And how we look at and face those challenges, especially if something is very public. Again, something like John going through and losing a leg. Something like someone who is a public figure, who is a member or part of that, someone that's close to you, if they pass on or something like this happens. When things are very public, when you are faced with these more public challenges, the last thing we've got to do is figure out not only how are we going to respond to that, but go ahead and figure out how we are going to respond to everyone else around us as things come up, as questions come up. Whether it's as simple as someone asking how they can help, or passing on their regards, their condolences if appropriate, or asking questions about things that have happened, or even just that moment of stopping in to say, that thing that can change your life because somebody says, sorry this has happened to you, but I see how you're facing it and how you're going through the challenge. Those notions of how we look at and how we manage that part of our story, I think becomes really critical and really important, is to know, because again, we have to start with ourselves. That's the one thing we have control over. It's not over what's going to happen or what has happened to us, but the only thing we can ever truly control is how we respond to those challenges. And then as we go forward, it's not only how we respond, it's how those closest to us respond. And then last but not least, it's how everyone else responds. And often it's none of their business. So looking at adversity and challenges, if you're going to be in a creative life, if you're going to be running a professional business, and you're going to be doing this based off of your creative output, your creative work, or you're just trying to figure out how to manage your day-to-day job, adversity is a part of life. And I would argue often it's the most important part of life. Because if we don't face challenges, we don't face adversity, and we don't respond to it well, then often what that means is we're missing out on those opportunities that have the potential to teach us the most. And so I'm not hoping or wishing for anyone to have personal challenges, ill will, anything like that. It's just the recognition that it will happen. It happens to all of us. Some of us it happens to more than others, but at the end of the day, it's really about how we respond to it. So the most helpful thing that any of us can do is to at least think through our life experiences, our life challenges, and figure out what could you have done better? How could you have responded better when these periods of adversity come up? Because what that will do is help you prepare for the next time a challenge comes up, the next time there is some form of adversity. And no, you can't plan for everything. No, you can't prepare for every possibility. If you try to, it'll leave you huddled in a corner. But what we can do is really sit down, spend the time to reflect on who we are, and try to figure out who is that person we really want to be. So until next time, this has been Creating Pros, and I'm Jim Nettles.